I want to point out that the New York Times reported this week there's no evidence that has come forth to suggest any hack of her private email server. So let's get that out of the way and make sure that it's clearly understood. The issue that nevertheless troubles me is one of transparency or a lack of transparency. Here's my question. If I, as a member of the public or the media, put forth a Freedom of Information Act request on her watch, and there were emails on her server that would be responsive to my request, did I have any chance of getting that information?
Yes, because actually almost all of the threads and email exchanges that she was a part of involved aides at the State Department that she deliberately copied or forwarded messages to for the purposes of preserving those records for FOIA compliance. And even now that she has turned over all the materials from her personal server, when you match things up, it turns out that there's over 90% overlap in terms of what was on her server and what was already in the State Department system. So,
okay,
yes.
So you're saying if she were emailing a colleague, an underling within the department, that I might not have my FOIA request responded to by her, by the secretary, but by one of the others. But what if she were seeking advice of Brian Fallon? What if my friend Lanny Davis were consulted by the secretary and it was a matter of public significance and relevance? I wouldn't be able to get that information, and therein lies the problem with the way in which she went about it, no?
Well, there are disagreements about what constitutes a public record, a government record. And so there are plenty of exchanges involving her and personal friends of hers or people that had served in her husband's administration in the 1990s. And a lot of it was personal interactions and exchanges, and not something that would be treated as a government record. But in turning things over to the State Department, she and her team made a very conscious effort to make sure that they were over-inclusive and turned over things that even a reasonable person might conclude was not a government record at all. And they turned it over anyway. And as a result, some 1,200 emails that she turned over have been actually returned back to her because the State Department decided that it didn't constitute a government record.
Right, but the problem is that she had sole power and authority to make that determination, and that's not, you know from your experience in the Justice Department, that's not the way this should work. There should be a FOIA technician, someone whose job it is to review that information, and because she went the private email server route, it empowered her to be the sole arbiter of what the public would see. I don't know that the public understands that, but that's what this issue is all about.
Well, like I said, Michael, we were over-inclusive, and that's been vindicated by the fact that some 1,200 emails already have been returned to her as not necessary for the purposes of responding to the FOIA request. But look, we would be the first to recognize that there's more that can be done to improve the FOIA compliance process. The State Department IG did a report a few weeks ago to that effect, and I know that Hillary Clinton herself, during her time there, sought to improve the department's compliance policies to ensure that the department was operating in as transparent a manner as possible. And with respect to the recommendations that got made in the report several weeks ago, I know that John Kerry, Secretary Clinton's successor, is implementing many of those reforms now. So we can always do better. It's a constantly evolving process to try to improve FOIA compliance.
I want to switch gears. Let's talk about the Republican race. Are you looking at it and saying, this is great, give us Donald Trump? Or are you saying, oh, my God, we don't want to open up that can of worms?
We're really focused on our primary contest. I know that Jeff Weaver is going to be on after me, and Senator Sanders is going to be in this for a while. He said that. And so today we have 3 contests playing out. Our goal going into today is to win more delegates than Senator Sanders. I know that they're going into today thinking that they're favored in 2 of the caucus states. We feel very strong about the Louisiana primary. But we're going to be contesting all 3 of the states, and our goal is to amass as many delegates as possible and build the lead that we already have. There'll be plenty of time to look ahead to a general election once we get closer to the nomination. And when we do, I think that the stakes are so high that Democrats will rally around our nominee, and the prospect of a Donald Trump candidacy on the Republican side will only further motivate Democrats to turn out next November.
I hear you, and I know you're focused on today, but the Times had a great story earlier this week where they talked to Clinton staffers about the way in which this war will be waged. Here's part of what the story said. That strategy is beginning to take shape with groups that support Mrs. Clinton preparing to script and test ads that would portray Mr. Trump as a misogynist and an enemy to the working class whose brash temper would put the nation and the world in grave danger. The plan is for those themes to be amplified later by two prominent surrogates. To fight Mr. Trump's ability to sway the news cycle, Mr. Clinton, meaning Bill Clinton, would not hold back on the stump, and President Obama has told allies that he would gleefully portray Mr. Trump as incapable of handling the duties of the Oval Office. Is that the plan? A 1-2 punch of Bill and Barack?
Well, that report got ahead of things by quite a big margin. I think it was largely based on some supporters of our campaign, but who are outside of our campaign, giving their thoughts about what they think would make for an effective strategy. We're not there yet. But when we do get closer to clinching the nomination on the Democratic side, we will start to plan how we want to run a general election campaign. When that time comes, though, regardless of whether it's Donald Trump or anybody else, we'll know that we'll be running against somebody that wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act, who wants to turn back the president's executive actions on immigration, who doesn't support pay equity, who doesn't support an increase in the minimum wage. So the contrast is going to be clear. Donald Trump certainly presents more of an unconventional candidacy, and so he can't be dismissed for that reason. But fundamentally, the contrast will be clear between the Democratic nominee and the Republican nominee, whoever emerges on the other side.